Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode number 76 of the Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. Hi, Chad. How's things going today?
Doing pretty good. Had a pretty exciting day. We've had a couple exciting weeks. We did a couple. I did a couple outdoor shows, and then Billy just ran to Humboldt, and so it's been a busy couple weeks. The season's getting rolling here, so March Madness in full effect, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with how busy we were today. I know Austin was kind of to that point where he was ready to be out of there when I left today. Um, the Frostbusters are a couple weeks away, so hopefully we'll be racing here in Iowa here. I think the 7th and 8th or whatever of April, and so this next or Saturday is of course the 1st of April. So it's getting there close, man. I see they had a ton of race cars at Humboldt last weekend. Man, that's
Yeah,
that's pretty exciting.
looked like a pretty good show. I didn't get to watch a lot of it. We watched some of it, but Billy said it was pretty good. And the one day was a little chilly. He's glad he took his jacket. So Friday there got rained out, so it looked pretty miserable. But
Yeah, I see they got rain on Friday. That's the problem this time of the year. That weather thing can be kind of a deal. So that's why I don't traveling to Marshalltown or Boone's not going to be such a big deal for me, but I'm not really sure. Some of them long distance ones, old Bob's not real good about going somewhere being all wet and freezing. James, Chad, you said on a 4 bar car mod, you said the right top bar should be pointed in. About how far in?
I'd say it's about 2 inches, right? I mean, it kind of depends. I'd put the car at attitude also, and kind of get the right front spring out, roll the right front down, jack up the left rear, and compress the right rear a little bit just to make sure. But you want that thing kind of pointed straight, dynamically. So usually it's about an inch and a half to 2 inches inboard on the front.
Yeah, that looks like that's about where we see most of them at the bottom. Bottom one's in about an inch, and the top one's in about 2 inches. That seems to be pretty decent. I see the left upper. They're actually towing that out so that it goes straight. I watched a video on that the other day. Somebody was talking about that in some video, and I looked at it. It kind of made sense. So when you're looking at it statically, everything looks like it's towed to the left, but when it goes through its roll, it ends up being relatively straight.
Yeah, the biggest thing is dynamically, you need to make sure that your heim joints aren't bound up. So if you're getting a ton of motion on that left rear, you're probably going to have to start them pointed to the left. Yeah.
Yeah. Switching from an open motor to a crate motor in IMCA mod. What type of changes should I make to my car setup wise? The biggest thing is you're just going to have to free the car up a little bit, maybe not run quite as much J bar angle in it. Um, you know, spring wise, you're probably going to be safe. Shock wise, you're going to be pretty much safe. The biggest thing is just with that less horsepower, you got to free it up more because you don't have the horsepower to help turn the car, and that's the biggest thing. And the car is going to be tighter on corner entry because you're putting, that 2 inch blade isn't very big, but it's enough that it makes a big difference on corner entry, and so like as the biggest thing we just see is everybody freeing their car up, running it a lot less tight. Well, we got some time for some questions. We got 66 people watching this. Um, any other racing go on over the weekend that you know about?
I'm not sure. I know the asphalt, the super light stuff, the Cars tour was going on down south, and a lot of that stuff down south is rolling. Nothing's going on up here yet, but They had some super light stuff going on down south there.
Yeah, I went to not this past weekend, but 2 weeks ago or a weekend ago, I went up to Minneapolis to actually a hummingbird seminar on how to learn how to operate my electronics and stuff. And the guys were saying that there was one guy there from Winnipeg, and he says they got 40 inches of ice still in Winnipeg, Canada. And I'm thinking, oh
Jeez.
my God, 40 inches. That's almost 4 feet, man. It's
They,
unreal.
they probably won't see open water till July.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I'm thinking, holy cow, 40 inches. Well, we had snow here. There was a patch of snow went through um, middle of Iowa. It wasn't very wide, but it covered the state. So we had 3 inches of snow on Sunday morning. Um, do you recommend any spraying anything on your Heims? What do you
Well,
recommend?
not if
I
you're
always
running Teflon.
I
Not on
always use
Teflon.
the Triflow on regular Heim joints.
Yeah, that stuff works good. Otherwise, Schaefer's has a God dang it, I keep forgetting to look that up. It's Schaefer's Pro Moly Chain Lube, I think it is. It's like a graphite dries. It's pretty nice stuff. We've been testing that in the Torrington bearings too, but that would work on rod ends. But the Teflon stuff, you don't want to put any kind of moisture on a Teflon Heim because that's going to attract the dirt. And then when the dirt gets into a Teflon, it wipes the Teflon out, and then the monoball is really loose inside of the race, and that's a huge issue. Them things are going to be bound up really bad. So Teflon, nothing. The other ones, I'd use some sort of a spray lube.
Oh, Anthony says Magnolia and the Talladega short track race last weekend. Awesome. Well, that's definitely down south, so that makes sense. What angles should the upper A arms be on a sport mod front to back? Well, once again, our right front, we would run a half a degree of angle, and on our left front, we run about 2 degrees of angle. What that does is that helps when you get in on the brakes, it kind of helps the car stay a little tighter with the type of tire that we've got with that sport mod modified for IMCA. That works pretty good. Matthew, what anti-dive do you prefer? Well, that's exactly what I just said, Matthew. The right front, what I usually do is a half a degree, and then the left front usually about 2 degrees. And everybody's got a different opinion on that. We've messed with putting more in that right front. I'm just not a real big fan of putting a lot in that right front because sometimes it seems like when I put more in the right front and you get on the brakes, it's easy to kind of shove that right front tire and make that tire break loose. And nowadays, with the amount of traction that we have in the back, it's just so important to keep traction in that front end so that the car turns. Because if it doesn't turn, you're going to bust it loose, and then it's going to be snappy loose, and it's just not going to work out. Do you ever worry about what hole you're in on the chassis side as long as your bar angles are correct at full droop? Well, I guess as long as your bar angles are correct at full droop, I probably wouldn't be super concerned about it. I mean, that's really what's most important. Biggest thing is a lot of people think that you get a lot of right rear travel, and you actually don't get a lot of right rear travel. If the right rear moves, if the right rear moves an inch, because when the traction comes in, the right rear actually starts to lift up because of the angle in that right upper bar. And so you're not going to see, you know, that's the only downside, not having a pull down rig, because the right rear is the one that you can't simulate as well in motion, but it's still, I mean, doing it in dynamic settings the way we're doing it, like Chad said earlier, taking the right front spring out and jacking up the left rear up against the chain, that still gets you pretty close to where you need to be. What grease should you use on the sliders when you rebuild them?
So any synthetic wheel bearing grease is fine. On our stuff, we just pack the inner piston full of grease when you rebuild it, and then you always got to make sure that inner piston spins freely. If you tighten that up all the way and that doesn't spin, then when you go in and out, it'll bind and it won't travel freely. So any synthetic wheel bearing grease is fine.
Bryce says Chad would love to see a little longer version on the body bolt insert for the folks that double fold their sails and decks, but understand it's not feasible.
I am making a note of that right now, and I will put that on Billy's desk tomorrow. That's pretty easy. We can make those longer. And that's just it. We don't know there's a problem unless guys like you tell us there's a problem. Unfortunately, we don't have our own team anymore. So a lot of the products are tested by racers like you, and it takes feedback from you guys to make the product line better. And we rely on you guys, and we really appreciate it when you guys bring us these things like this, something so simple as, hey, this isn't long enough for a double fold. So memo received. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, that's the thing, nowadays, unless you're out in the field all the time, which, running a business, it's a little hard to stay out in the field all the time. And so you got to rely on the racers to give you good feedback like that. And so it's always great to know. Brandon, IMCA stock car, what's the lightest right front spring you recommend for a 0.4 mile momentum racetrack? I'm not that big on some of those really light springs on those stock cars. I think 900 would be the softest I would run. I would probably still be close to 1,000 for a racetrack like that has a lot of speed to it. I know there's some guys out there that are running some 800-pound stuff. That's pretty soft for a 2,900-pound car.
Yeah, I'd say the problem with that soft stuff is the softer you go, you change your ride height, right? Yep. So unless you can tie down the right front, like we used to do with the shocks and all that stuff, unless you can maintain your ride height, then there really is not a benefit to running the softer spring, wouldn't you say? You're affecting that initial roll center, so you're trying to get the light rate of the spring to induce roll and get the attitude, but at the end of the day, if you can't have that ride height and control that with a chain or a shock, you're defeating the purpose in my book. But
yeah, I would agree. Because I know that there's guys out there that are trying to go softer, and the problem is softer spring takes away forward traction because we don't have a lot of traction in that rear suspension, and so it just almost. Yeah, you got to be careful on that. 900 would be the softest I would try. Dan says, she looks to me like all the towing is on the right front wheel now. Is that true?
I don't know. Tow in and out?
I'm assuming that is the case. That's my opinion. Is I always tow the right front out. That's where I set my toe out on it. It's harder to do, It's a little bit more of a process to do, but I still tow the right front out. On a GRT USRA B mod, and it's tight entering the corner, what's the best adjustment? Your J bar, if it's tight entering the corner, you gotta. I mean, if it's not getting over on the right front, that's kind of the decision that you got to kind of make on where is it tight at. Most generally, these cars are right rear tight, which means that we tend to like to run a lot of J bar with these small tires, and the problem with that is you get the car so tight that then it gets snappy loose. And the problem is when it snaps loose, then it's hard to get it back. So it goes into a push, and then all of a sudden it snaps loose, and you're hanging the tail, and it makes it, But the J bar would be my first choice of adjustment. I would raise it on the pinion. Maybe lower it on the frame, but I'd probably start with raising it on the pinion. It would be my suggestion.
How's the Harris Clash planning?
Harris Clash is going well. I haven't actually worked on it for a couple of weeks. August 8th won't be long. I mean, like I said, we're into the 1st of April, and so you know how fast all goes. It won't be long. It'll be August 8th, but we're looking forward to it. Look for another good year. Purse is going to be the same as last year, so they're not changing anything there. Like I said, I was a little disappointed last year. I'd like to have more champions back, but we didn't have as many champions there. Some of the champions are racing other series and doing other things, and so we're contemplating doing something a little different there, but I haven't really decided on what to do. I don't know if we'll do anything this year, but if we don't get a lot of champions back this year, we're probably definitely need to rethink that next year. Dan, so you're saying that the toe in on the right front or toe out, no left side toe? Well, to be honest with you, a lot of people say if you tow the right front out, the car will be tighter getting in. If you tow the left front out, the car is going to be freer getting in. Honest to gosh, Dan, to be really truthful about it, I question if the car knows the difference. I don't see how when it's hooked to a steering wheel, I question really if it makes a whole lot of difference. It's a whole lot easier to set the toe on that left side. I've just always done it on the right side, so I just continue to do it that way. But I'm not convinced it makes a lot of difference. Some people still think it does, but I'm not. I haven't had anybody present me with a good enough argument that would tell me how the car is going to know the difference whether it's towed in on the left or towed in on the or towed out on the right or towed out on the left. Ryan, when we make a steering adjustment on a 4-link car, how do we know if we should adjust the left side bars or the right side bars to take steer in or out? What's your thoughts on that one, Chad?
Well, I mean, if you're making a roll steer adjustment, it depends on the side, right? That's kind of a loaded question. If you're going to change the left side, then change the left side. If you're trying to get a lot of dynamic, it has to do with dynamic too. So a lot of times you're going to start the car basically square, right? And then when you want to adjust from there, if you're going to make a bar change or something to get more left rear steer, you might have to back the left side up a little bit and trail the left side so you don't get more steer. So I think, it kind of depends on what side you want to work on. A more popular adjustment, I think, is the right rear, steering that ahead and back. Your left rear is going to be what it is, as far as you're going to find a max steer point, right? And then you're going to kind of base off that. But the right side, you can tighten and loosen the car relatively easy by making a quick adjustment on both bars there.
Yeah, that's kind of what we would just, I mean, we end up adjusting the left side because we change the amount of chain that it has and actually adjust how much steer it has by drop load. But, the right side's a lot easier to do. Sandra, on a USRA modified, do you prefer a solid mount brake or a brake floater? Is there a difference in performance between the two?
Well, I would say that I assume you're talking about mounted to the axle tube, and that's if you're a lift arm car, you're probably going to be mounted to the tube. On a pull bar car, you're going to want to be on a brake floater or on the cage. Um, the difference is when you decel and you're mounted to the axle tube, it has a lot of effect on the decel of that. And on a pull bar, it tends to break traction easier than a lift arm. So it's kind of a deal where lift arms are usually on the axle tube and pull bar cars are on the floaters. So the floater arm is more tunable than being clamped to the cage. But when you're clamped to the suspension cage, you're going to have more influence because you're going through the four link rods, but you're also hooked and rotating with the shock and spring assembly, which is mounted pretty far back in the car. So you have a lot of leverage. So when it's clamped to the suspension cage, it has more effect. So it'll be on the right front harder and up faster than the brake floater arm. But I would say you could tune the brake floater to act just like that. There's a lot of guys that'll make adjustments to their brake floater to make it feel like it's clamped to the cage. So that's my take on that, I guess.
I would agree. I like the adjustment. I think there's times where you're getting on the right front too hard under braking, and so you can adjust that brake floater rod and make a big difference in what the car's doing. So I like the adjustment.
That's kind of why we built the combo cages, so you can clamp and unclamp from the suspension cage. So your short track, you're on the cage, and a bigger track, you're on the rod, so you can change the influence.
If your rules allow you to run a Nova control arm, would you do that? It is long than a stock Chevelle one. Just thinking outside the box how to get it. The only problem is I don't think the Nova control arm is interchangeable with the Chevelle. I think the Chevelle. I think the Chevelle A-frame is narrower or wider, one or the other. I know like the 78 Monte Carlo, that metric frame, they are interchangeable, but I don't think it is interchangeable with the Chevelle, but I could be wrong. Answer the question, if it's interchangeable and your rules allow it, yeah, whatever you can do to widen that car out without doing it with the wheels would definitely be advantageous. But you're also then going to have to change your spring location, or if the spring, and it would also depend on if it's longer than the Chevelle, where's it longer at? Is the spring moved out further, or is the length outside the spring? So that you're going to want to factor in what your spring rate's going to have to be because of that ratio between where the spring mounts and where the A-frame mounts. Can you explain the light left rear spring with the heavy right rear spring theory versus the heavy left rear spring and the lighter right rear spring we have seen in the past. Um, well, the new trend is going with that lighter spring on the left rear. What you can do is you can actually go lighter, and of course it compresses it more so that when you get on the throttle, it wants to hike up a little bit more, so it puts more steer in the car. The heavier right rear spring, when we go to that lighter left rear spring and it hikes up more, it actually frees the car up a little bit. So we're actually stiffening the right rear spring to help tighten the car up. The old way of the heavy left rear and the soft right rear, that was good at one point in time, but now we're getting to the point where we're getting these cars on the right front so much more than we used to that we have to go stiffer on the right rear because we're going softer on the right front. And that's the biggest reason why. It's just a different philosophy. Now, does the old philosophy still work? I still believe that it does work well in certain situations, but no matter what situation, I still run a little softer left rear than I do a right rear, just because I want more side bite because of our tire, and we're running softer right front springs. And when you go softer on the right front, the car is going to get over on the right front, and if you don't have spring in the right rear, the car is going to roll to the right rear and get tight and lazy and not be responsive enough to pick the car back up and help it turn. Sean, IMCA Sport Mod, tight on entry. Would you be more effective to go to a 550 right front spring or to a 600, go down on the right rear from a 225 to a 200? I don't believe that would be the case. I still like that softer right front spring and that stiffer right rear. Granted, it's going to be tighter, but that's where I would do a Panhard bar adjustment and free the car up with a Panhard bar. Maybe move the right rear to the right of the car an eighth to a quarter of an inch to help it be less tight on corner entry. I just think that softer right front spring helps the car get on attitude and helps the car get hiking the left rear and gives more steer to the left rear, so it helps turn the car once you're in the middle of the corner. Mike says, I think toe out is a total amount divided evenly between the right and the left. I would agree with that. That's kind of where I said I still question the fact some guys are pretty firm on that, believing the right front makes the car tighter getting in, and some guys think going to the left front makes it looser getting in. I still believe in the fact that it's a total, because I can't believe that. I still question if the car knows the difference.
Yeah, because if you're towed out a half inch, right,
Yeah.
and you do it on the right front, the left front's going to have to go a quarter inch to the left to be going straight.
Right.
But I think a lot of guys like to do the right front because that gives you a little bit more back steer catch.
Exactly. And that's probably the biggest reason. That's kind of why we always did it that way. And like I said, I've just always done the right front. And even though it's a pain in the butt now with those drop tie rods, because we're getting on the right front so much. Sandra says it's a pull bar car. Well, whether it's a pull bar car or a torque arm car, I still believe I would run a brake floater. I like the adjustability. I think it's more tunable. Austin, do you prefer running a 20 or a 19 G60 on the right rear? If I could get the stagger, I would run 19s all the way around. Problem is to get stagger, some guys don't like a lot of stagger. Some guys like more stagger. Kind of depends on your chassis setup. I myself like more stagger because I think it's more of a consistent thing for the driver to drive. But so if I could get the stagger, I would prefer 19s all the way around. But if you can't get enough stagger, then going with that 20 on the right rear is really your only option. And the way that, the load that's on that tire isn't going to matter as much if it's crowned in the middle, because you're rolling that right rear under half the time anyway, pretty much. Brian, what are you seeing now for left side percentage in the A mods? For the most part, we're still seeing guys in that 54, 55 range. Um, I haven't seen much of that change because, we're not changing the width of the cars and we're not really changing our tires. So I haven't seen any changes be made in that. If you can get the car to stick on the right front, a higher left side weight car will come off the corner better. Biggest problem is getting that weight transfer to the right front. And see, a lot of people will talk about putting the soft front spring in the right front to get the car over in the right front. Well, actually, what happens is you put soft springs in there, and so you get motion, but you actually don't load the tires. So you're getting more travel, but it takes more travel to get the full amount of load. And it's kind of like, the old adage. Let's just say for simple numbers, we have 1,000-pound spring, and we get 1,000 pounds of load. So that's going to mean that spring's going to compress 1 inch. If we have a 500-pound spring with 1,000 pounds of load, it's going to compress 2 inches. So it just all depends on how much actual travel you want on the right front, depending on what you get for that spring. So I don't see the left side percentages. Like I said, from what I've done, our stuff is still staying the same. We haven't really changed anything. Justin says, speaking of stagger in an IMCA sport mod, where would a good amount to start be? My wife's first year in the class from the factory stock stuff. I still think a good place to start's 1 inch in the front and 2 inches in the rear. It's going to help turn the car in the middle of the corner, so she's, it's not going to. The front stagger will help turn the car getting in. Rear stagger will help turn the car when you're on the throttle. So it's going to be easier for her to drive the lesser stagger, because the only time it's going to be loose with the stagger would be coming off the corner, and you can adjust lead or trail to make up the difference there. So I'd start with 1 inch in the front and 2 inches in the back. Sean, I'm also bottoming out my right front onto my lower control arm with an 8-inch frame height from the lower control arm bolt. Is that okay, or should I raise the frame up? Well, I wouldn't raise the frame up. I mean, that tells me that you've got a soft enough spring in there to get enough movement. You might actually consider. What happens is it depends on how soft a spring you're running, but springs and shocks correlate together. A lot of these guys will go they've been running a soft right front shock compression wise, and then they soften up the spring. Well, the problem is when you soften up the spring, you actually have to stiffen up the shock, because the spring regulates how much it actually travels. The shock regulates how fast it travels. Well, if we're wanting say if we got a 600-pound spring, we need that spring to travel fast. So we go soft on compression Now, if we've got a 400-pound spring, we need that spring to travel slowly so that it doesn't jam the front end into the dirt. And but with your frame heights, I wouldn't go any higher. I wouldn't raise my frame up. I would check on how much where you got your chain on the left rear. Maybe you're getting a lot of left rear movement, and that's getting the car over on there. That's and it kind of depends too. Panhard bar can, if you've got a lot of angle in the panhard bar, that's going to stick to right front hard too. So you might want to consider, looking at that, a little less J-bar angle. And I would lower it on the frame rather than raising it under. If you're driving the right front into the ground, I would lower my J-bar on the frame side rather than the rear end.
Would you make a slight anti-dive adjustment?
You could do that. The only thing is, of course, it's only going to work when you're under brakes. So it depends if your driver's a real good trail breaker, it would definitely help. That right front, people think it's spring rate and frame heights, but I've actually seen cars that have a ton of J-bar angle in it and a lot of left rear droop that just dive that front end into the ground. And so I don't know, I don't think that's the problem. I would look elsewhere. What is a good starting point for bar links on a 4-link modified? Well, kind of depends on the chassis and depends on your chassis builder, but as a rule of thumb, like our stuff, we've got 16s and 14s on the lowers and 16s on the uppers. A lot of 4-link cars have 17 uppers and 6 and 15-inch lowers, but there's a lot of room to play with. I mean, we've played with a longer left upper, going to that 17 and run a shorter right upper, and that has some advantages in certain situations. But a good starting point, that would be my recommendations: either a pair of 17s and 15s or a pair of 16s and 14s. So any new exciting projects you've been working on, Chad? Been too busy to work on any projects?
March Madness does make it difficult to work on new stuff. We got some stuff on the list. The engineers are working on some new Ultra Force stuff. So the innovation never stops. It doesn't matter the time of year. People are always dreaming something up. So we'll have some interesting things to test this summer, I think.
Awesome. Well, that's always exciting. Testing new stuff is one of my favorite things to do because you can't go faster. I mean, if you don't try something different, if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, the guy next to you, he's making changes and he's getting faster. If you don't make changes, you're going to go the same speed. And it's not that you're slowing down, everybody else is getting faster. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, we kind of ran out of questions here. It's kind of been a quieter night tonight. RC, caster camber on a modified, what seems to be the best to you guys? Well, it depends on if you're running the 3-piece spindles. My right front's going to probably be 6.5 to 7 degrees of camber and probably about 5 degrees of caster. My left front's going to be 4 degrees of camber and probably 2 to 3 degrees of caster. If I'm running the Pinto one-piece spindles, the big difference is we just run a little less caster with them, 2 and 4 rather than 3 and 5. The camber is going to be the same. And that's just static numbers because it kind of depends on how much camber gain you get, because you got to, kind of make sure that you test that all out in dynamic mode to make sure that that right front still has. I always make sure that the car, even in dynamic mode, that the right front still got 2 degrees of camber in it. Because you have to understand when you're putting 1,000 pounds or some of these cars with load stick have a 1,300 pounds or 1,200 to 1,300 pounds of load at 3 inches, and that's a lot of load on that tire. So that tire is going to fold under depending on your air pressure. Tim, recently purchased a hobby rear end, and I noticed there isn't anything to mount the brake lines to. Would be nice to see some type of clip to mount without having to weld. Well, the only reason we don't do that is because it just all depends on how you run your brake lines. Some guys like to have a one short line going from the center of the car to the top of the rear end, and then having a steel line all the way across the rear end. Some guys like to have the standard setup, which is 2 short hoses, one on each side. So that's the reason we've never done that, because I'm just not sure where everybody would want it. But that's still something good. I'll talk to the guys about that and see what their thoughts are, and maybe they've got a better opinion than me. Aaron says he missed the answer on the 19 or 20. Well, once again, if I can get adequate stagger, I would have all 19s, because that tire is going to lay flatter. It's got a better surface. The 20 is going to be your right rear stagger tire, and if you have to go to a 20 on the right rear, that's okay, because once again, that tire rolls under, so having that tire crowned isn't going to be as important on the right rear as it would be on the right front. I don't run anything but 19s on the front and the left rear. John says, and Bryce actually answered my question too. You talk about toe on the rear axle. How do you get that with a solid axle? Just learning terms.
We were talking about toe on the bars, not the actual axle itself.
Right. The trailing arms or the control arms or the bars on a 4-link car, you've got 4 of them, of course. And so you have to tow them in a specific way so that when the car goes into dynamic, when the car's in dynamic under load, you want to have everything running straight. That's going to give you the best. Go ahead.
So it's kind of hard to see, but the illustration kind of shows the bar going in towards the front like that. So when we were talking about rear toe, that's what we were talking about there. If your rear end's towed, that means the rear end's bent, and that's bad.
Yeah, that's not good. If you got toe in the rear end housing itself, that's not a good deal. Hi, Josh. I appreciate you. We enjoyed doing this, so we like having you guys come on here. On a sport mod, what do you still consider your starting point for chain slack at ride height? Very generic question, but do you generally leave it alone unless the track is super slick, smooth and slick? Um, no, I'm assuming you're talking about the right rear chain, but we'll cover both of them. The right rear chain, I set the right rear chain so that there's still, just, man, a quarter of a turn of load in that spring, just so that that spring is not free in there. So then
Hanging.
when you set it down, you're going to have slack in that chain. The left rear, of course, is going to all depend on how much, roll steer you want in the car and how much droop you want in the car. As a normal basis, we usually run about 4.5 inches of droop on our sport mod cars. So that's about what when you jack the car up or jack the frame up, it takes about 4.5 inches of ride height to get hooked to the chain. What's the max load on a 125-pound spring? In my opinion, the 200 pounds would probably be my max load. That seems to be pretty consistent on the 100 and 125-pound springs. That seems to work pretty well. Jim, working with a very limited budget, if you could buy only one tool to help with your setting up your car, what would it be? Scales, etc. My personal opinion, of course, is a set of scales. There's a lot of neat tools that work really well, but I think the scales almost are the most essential tool to have to get a balance. And then once you get more budget or whatever, then I would purchase a load stick. Because the load stick goes hand in hand with the scales. The load stick just gives you more information about what the car is doing. And Chad can actually talk more about the load stick.
Yeah, we get this question a lot, like people that are selling their scales to buy a load stick or a load machine, and the scales are the most essential because that's where everything starts. And we do so much now with load sticks and load machines, but they don't tell you if your spindle's bent. So the scales are essential. For sure, you got to have them. If you make any kind of adjustment to your balance, your weight balance, you need to rescale and reset your benchmarks for your load machine or your load stick. That's probably that's the number one tool you need for sure, is a set of scales. The notebook we build with the machines and the sticks is just to give you good at the track data when things are rolling good, so you got something to a benchmark and a baseline to go off of, so you know when you're good and why you're good, and so that at the racetrack you can change springs very efficiently and fast, so you can make accurate adjustments. When you're dirt racing and you're parked in a grass field, there is really no flat surfaces, and most tracks don't even have a flat scale pad. So then that's where the load stick comes in second, so you can do the at the track changes. And then the load machine would be for the rear of the car. I don't know what you got, Jim, but obviously if it's a stock car, it doesn't use a load machine, but a stock car would use a load sticks and use scales. Every car would use scales, so that's automatically our number one, I would say.
Yeah, whether you got a hobby stock or street stock or whatever, still having a set of scales is your baseline, and then going from there. Adam, chassis builder recommends scaling the car with a full fuel cell and without the driver. Is that a disadvantage to your method of with driver and half the amount of fuel when scaling it? Well, first of all, whatever your chassis builder tells you is probably going to be your best bet, since you're working with him and giving him information. The reason why we scale the cars the way we do is, of course, the driver's weight always has to be in the car. Now, we used to not include the driver's weight, and but what had happened when we did that, we had originally at once upon a time scaled a car with the driver in it, took him out of the car, and then rescaled it and got those measurements and ride heights and everything. And so that's what we put in our setup sheet when we didn't use the driver. But now we've kind of went to using the driver just because drivers vary so much in weight. You get a young 15-year-old driver that weighs 120 pounds, and then you'll get a seasoned driver that's double that. And so that's the reason why we scale with the driver. Full of fuel, it just all depends. He's wanting you to scale where you start the race at. We scale with a half full of fuel because we kind of anticipate the last portion of the race. And so that's why we do it the way we do it. I'm not saying that he would be wrong. Once again, he's got a method, and I'm quite sure whatever he's telling you to do is probably what I would recommend doing. Ryan, does Wehrs have a ride height checker for going over the lower control arm bolt instead of trying to squeeze our bellies underneath the nose with a tape measure?
Well, we make a pointed bolt that goes in the lower that you can read from, sticking the tape down through the front of the car, I believe. We built a prototype. Bob and I actually worked on that, and then we had an issue with fitment with the steering arms, and we never went back to it. So that prototype is still laying on my desk, and we haven't done anything with it. I don't know if Ben's Longacre has that one. I'm not sure if that would work on a stock. Have you looked at that one? Mm-hmm. Longacre makes one. Maybe go to their website and check that out. But that one might work. But we haven't went back and perfected that prototype.
And we actually at BHE make a heck of a set of scale stands.
That's what you need.
That's what you need, so you can put the car up on scale stands, and then you can roll underneath there on the creeper and measure it that way. Those work pretty slick. Then you can actually do all your maintenance while the car is up on the ground, and it works pretty slick. Problem is we can't keep them in stock. They go out. I think we've got 5 of them back ordered right now, waiting for some more of them to come in. And like I said, we just the scale stand thing is excellent. Jeffrey says BSB has one. Okay. Thanks for that information, Jeffrey. Watch any of the college basketball games or anything, Chad?
Well, we had it on a little bit in the booth there in the last 2 weekends in the sports shows. I don't know. I don't get into the stick and balls too much, but some of them games were pretty exciting.
Yeah, I don't. On a regular basis, I don't watch them much. I went to a Iowa State girls game this year with my son and granddaughter, and I had a good time with that. That was a lot of fun. And of course, our Iowa Hawkeyes made the Final Four. They defeated Louisville, so it's the first time they've made the Final Four since 1993. So that's been exciting. So I watched a couple girls games this weekend.
Cool. When's the next show?
Our next show will be, this is the 27th, so the 10th. Hopefully, if the weather's good, we'll be able to talk about the Frostbusters at Boone and Marshalltown on our next show.
Exciting.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. I'm looking forward to that. I'm ready to go racing, man. I've been talking racing for all winter now, and it's time to. We made it through the chassis schools, and that's something too. I want to remind everybody: if you miss the chassis schools, you can still go online and purchase one of those schools, and it gives you 24/7 access, 365 days to that school, and you can watch it and watch it and watch it and rewatch it or whatever you want to do. Just go to racetechinfo.tv, and that school is still available. We had, the schools this year were really good. We had good crowds, and they went really well, and I was very pleased with the interaction that we had this year. Everybody seemed to be more pumped up about going racing, and so that was pretty exciting. So now we just need to go racing and see how all that worked out.
It won't be long.
No, it won't be long. Won't be long at all. Got a new trolling motor on my boat, so I got to go out and get that all tuned in. I was going to go out, stick it in the water this weekend, but I decided against that. I want to wait till it's a little warmer. Maybe next Sunday I'll get that done. Looking forward to that too. I've been going through lures and stuff for the last month, just patiently waiting.
Yeah.
There's only so much preparation that I can do without getting super bored. Watching fishing videos. Chad, in my car, the cockpit tin close to the center of the sport mod, I'd like to see a Wehrs pole bar mount that's threaded. We used to make a mount that was threaded, but then your mount had to be fairly wide, which wouldn't really accomplish what you're wanting to do there, I don't think.
Yeah, the best bet there would be to email me a picture of what you got going on there and see what we can come up with there. There are a couple companies that make that threaded rod that have that adjuster on there. The bad part is as soon as it takes a rock, it's pretty much junk. So
yeah,
that's the unfortunate part of those.
Or you'll get on there with your impact and zing and lock the threads up.
Yeah.
Chad, how's the feedback on your new app? Anyone got to put it in use yet?
Yeah, we got quite a few people signed up. So far, everybody seems to like it. We're having a few issues with how to transfer the key from when you purchase it on the website, and then you go to the Play Store to put the application or the key in when you purchase it. So we are in the process of going through the App Store, so it's paid for as soon as you download it. So that'll streamline that, but that's really the only problems we've had with it so far.
Jim says he's got a USRA B mod. It runs a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of stagger. Seems tight in the middle of the corner. Won't rotate. Slow in the middle. Will more stagger help? Yeah, most definitely. You would benefit, and with your tire that you're running, that American Racer tire has got a lot. It's got some pretty good grip to it. It's pretty. 2 inches is probably realistic, and depends on the situation. If the situation's fairly sticky, 2 inches of stagger is definitely going to be what you need. I very seldom ever run less than an inch, even on a dry slick racetrack, because I still want the car to Yeah, I still like the car to kind of rotate on its own without dragging the tire. Dan, so Bob, do you still scale your car every night before you race it? Actually, no. I would scale it, and get everything good, and then I kind of give the car what it wants and what I think it might need, and then I'll put it back on there ever so often. If for some reason we went to the racetrack and we were extremely fast after we made some adjustments, then I'm definitely putting it on the scale so that I can put it in my notebook of what we did. Or if we go to the racetrack and really suck, definitely putting it back on the scales to figure out what the heck happened.
Or crash.
But, as long as we don't hit nothing or get crashed or whatever, I'll run that thing 4 or 5 nights without scaling it. But like I said, I scale it whenever I want to make sure I've got information or need information.
Cool.
Well, we're at the 8 o'clock mark. Thank you guys for all your questions. Great questions again tonight. Good information, and hopefully, we got time. We got one more. Feel like explaining the spring table you mentioned and the effect of the 11-inch spring with the 13-inch spring? Well, Chad's got the spring table.
I don't know if I got the B-mod one. I do have the B-mod one. This basically shows you what a shorter spring would be if that's lined up in it.
Yeah, that looks good.
Yeah, so you see where the screw jack tip is and the spring is what determines the spring table. So this side being lower than this side, this is going to roll over the top of that easier with the shorter spring here and that screw jack down. So on a spring separate, on a screw jack style car like this, it's the height of the spring and the tip of the screw jack. If you were a coilover car like an A-mod, then it goes back to where it hooks up on the chassis. So on an A-mod, it has to do only with the point where it's hooked up to the chassis. The spring height has no effect.
Yeah. And the 11-inch spring definitely will make the car tighter. Normally, what I have found when I've experimented with that 11-inch right rear spring, I've had to go up one rate. So in other words, if I was running, say, a 225 13-inch spring, I've always felt that I had to go to a 250 11-inch spring just because that additional spring table change will definitely get the car in the right rear. And sometimes it can get too lazy with that 11-inch spring, even though the spring rate's the same. It's just the change to the spring table movement is quite a bit.
Yeah, we got our 2 new cups will be coming pretty soon. I think one's actually at the plater, and then one should be on the plater in a week or 2. But we made some more rear cup with some more drops, so we'll have 1 inch less and 1 inch more drop in the cups, so you can really tune the in between spring heights.
And I would prefer going with a drop cup and staying with the 13-inch springs myself, because I don't know, it just seems like with where those 5-inch springs are located on the top of the housing, I don't know, there's something about that 11-inch spring I just haven't. I know some guys are pretty fast with it, but I just never really cared for the consistency. Well, hi, Todd. Glad you were in on tonight. We appreciate it. Once again, thank you, guys. We appreciate everybody chiming in here. We had another good time. We'll see everybody on April 10th.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.